Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show as we live stream on a midday Saturday, the 7th of September, 2019, 11:30 Eastern Time. And of course, Dorian playing its last cards as it moves northeastward and heading for a landfall over Nova Scotia this afternoon. We have already seen weather conditions deteriorate considerably. And from there, it will be on to Newfoundland on the western shores. And after that, into the Atlantic graveyard, and we can finally say goodbye to it. So, we're going to take a look at what's going on as of midday. So, please be advised that if you're watching this on a replay, we are at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So, obviously, if you're looking at this later this afternoon, it is dated. Thanks and good morning to everybody that's on the chat board this morning. Uh, the um, uh, the audio levels, I hope, are pretty good. I did a little bit of playing with them this morning, and I actually ordered a new microphone so that I can take care of the sound issues that I've been having when broadcasting from home. So as long as you guys can hear me, please let me know. And we'll not only look at Dorian, but we're going to take a look at what the impact of the weather is behind it, because the upside is all the nice weather that's occurring in the east. And we'll look at the long range and the tropics. So let's get to it and see what's going on this morning with respect to Dorian and all the weather that's currently on the surface map. The winds, actually, there is a buoy that is out offshore. I'm going to start with this because it seems to be working, and I don't want to lose the observations. But we're going to start with the current surface map. Now, there are still some tropical storm warnings up for parts of Maine, down East Maine, and those will last for a little while longer before they will be canceled. In the meantime, we have warnings up for much of Nova Scotia and for the western shores of Newfoundland, and I'll go through those in a little bit. But right now, there is a buoy here that is well east of Cape Cod. It's at 41 and 66. That is roughly about 180 miles, 150, 180 miles to the east of Chatham Airport, and it's reporting a wind speed sustained at 63, gusting to 94 miles an hour, 54 knots to 82 knots, so 63 gusting to 94. Now we do have observations coming in on Nova Scotia, including Bacaro Point, which is the strongest sustained and gust that I've seen so far. They just updated. Their fifth wind is their wind is northeast at 58 miles an hour, gusting to 72 miles an hour, or 50 knots, gusting to 63. We've got some wicked action here coming off the shoreline now as the center of Dorian grows closer. The buoy that is out at 42 and a half and 64, that's southeast at 65. On the gust, 51 gusting to 65. Sable Island is 32 miles an hour from the east, gusting to 44. So they're a little ways offshore yet. The core of the storm is still to the south. And in and around Halifax, I'm going to see if I can add a few more observations. This is, at this stage of the game, you really want to look at all these surface obs and these buoy obs, because they're going to tell you pretty much where all of this is headed. The satellites are a little difficult to look at because of the fact that you're seeing the storm now getting distorted by the higher latitude, the faster movement, and the gradual process that is turning this over into a post-tropical system. Lunenburg, hope I said, I apologize ahead of time if I pronounce any of these cities wrong, is 36 gusting to 46. So in and around Halifax, we have some observations. At Osborne Head, it's 39 gusting to 53. Oddly enough, Halifax, I'm not sure, it's on the coast here, but I'm not sure what exactly it is. It's 20 gusting to 43, and to the east offshore, there's a buoy 47 to 56. You go in a little bit further, the winds are cranking, but slightly lower. The dockyard in Halifax is 27, gusting to 43. And if going back even further to the West Bedford Range, 13, gusting to 24. The coast is cranking with the winds. You can also see that flashing there. This website is usually pretty good with regards to how it behaves, but every once in a while it does act up. It's trying to put the radar echoes that it sees off the Maine radars and laying them on what we can see from Nova Scotia, but it's just kind of having a bit of a tough time here. So if you look at just judging from the observations, you kind of get this sort of stretched out look of this system here. The center almost looks to be oblong, and it's probably trying to go somewhere in this direction here, judging by the northeast wind at 50 and the southeast wind that's out off of the ocean. So figure somewhere in here is where it wants to go, and then it's going to be moving on northeastward from there. Now you can see some of the radar echoes. It's probably not picking it up all of the echoes that are out further to the east. So the radar information just basically gets cut off at a certain point. But we do see some heavier rains up in the extending up from the Bay of Fundy and going northeastward from there toward New Brunswick. So very busy here so far today. And here's the look. I'm just going to just switch back once with you guys. I assume you guys can hear me okay. No one's been complaining about the audio, so that is a good thing. Excellent. All right, coming back, let's go to the satellite. And I think if you look carefully here, I just updated this about 10 or 15 minutes ago. If you look carefully, you can actually see when it goes from the IR to the visible, you can actually see the eye exposed to a large extent. There's convection on the northeast, on the north and northwest side, but there's very little weather when you look on the south side of this. So it's right. I'm going to try to get this while it's moving because it's hard. I can't stop this in mid-frame right there. So when the loop goes over, you'll see the eye go into that black spot. That's where the center of the storm is right now. And again, notice on the south side, there really isn't much in the way of heavy precip. You do have some lighter precip and some lower clouds. So, you know, the real action is going to be up in this area, north and east of the center. And at this point, earlier today, at the start of the loop, you have the center east of Long Island. So it's still at about 40 degrees north, but it's moving at a very, very fast pace. The 11 o'clock advisory at it's now at 42 north, 66 west. Top winds are 85 miles an hour and moving northeast at 29 miles an hour. So on the actual advisory, the distance from Nova Scotia is 205 miles. It's 205 miles south-southeast of Eastport, Maine, and about 215 miles southwest of Halifax, Nova Scotia. 953 millibars. And that's a big pressure drop that we've seen. And I think what's happening is you're seeing this. We were in the 960s earlier, now down to 953. So we are seeing a bit of non-tropical, or what we call baroclinic intensification going on. Non-tropical strengthening like you see in winter-type storms. I want to just read here quick because I didn't get time to read the advisory as to whether we've seen some what NHC is saying on this. Satellite imagery indicates Dorian starting the extratropical transition. And that's pretty obvious because you see that the cold air clouds and training coming in on the south side as we saw on the loop. And you know, some sort of warm front trying to develop into the northeast, and create a warm sector. But there's still a core, and the buoy reported a pressure of 955 as the center passed. So the initial pressure is lowered to 953. Intensity left at 75 knots on recently we've received windsat data showing hurricane force winds southwest of the center. So as you're making this transition, of course, when we're seeing the wind field expanding the way it is, we are also, you're going to see that large area of gales, and you're going to see a rather large area of winds close to or over hurricane force spread out over a large area. But with a 953 pressure, if this were a truly tropical system, you certainly should have a core of 100 knot winds near the center. You don't really have that. Now, anyone that's going to be east of the center as it moves northward, you're going to wind up seeing some gusts that are going to be up there. And those gusts might be close to 100 in some places. It wouldn't shock me. Here's the wider satellite view. And of course, the upside in all of this for the eastern part of the U.S. is the fact that I can't get this down to the bottom of the screen. But on the back side, if you have this developing and turning into a post-tropical cyclone at this point, so what you wind up having is cooler, drier air being funneled down into the Northeast and down into the mid-Atlantic states. Look how dry it is. I mean, all the way to just basically cloud-free from Vermont and eastern New York clear down to Georgia and North Florida. So when you get these big features, they basically kind of just wipe out all the energy from the atmosphere and create some deep blue sky and sunshine, which is what I'm enjoying here. We do have actually a bit of a weak cold front, though, that is to the west, right back through here, producing a few clouds. And the cold front is not going to do much of anything as it moves eastward. It's going to just be very weak as it goes by. There's no precip with it, obviously, because of all the dry air. And where's my mouse? Oh, here we go. So let me just clean this screen, and we'll bring this up a little bit tighter. Why is it not? My thing is just not behaving. I'm trying to clean the screen up a bit here. Gotta love technology, folks. So there's a bit of a weak front out to the northwest that's going to be coming through here into the eastern states. All that will really do is produce a few clouds, but it is going to eventually set up a bit of a frontal boundary to the south and impact the weather during the beginning of next week, which we'll get to. Now, here's the enhanced view. Pretty impressive core still there, but again, all along the south side of this, you really don't see very much of anything. And that core, the way it's moving, it looks like it's going to be coming right over Nova Scotia, the western part of the island, in the next few hours and during this afternoon. So you have your worst weather still ahead of you with regards to this. Now, here's the water vapor imagery, and I thought this was a really good view to use because you can see what's happening in the upper atmosphere with all of this. We talked yesterday about the trough, the lead trough that was lifting it up to the northeast, and then you had the secondary shortwave. If you follow the drier air around, you actually can see the flow in Canada and what's happening with the upper flow. Right here is that second shortwave trough that is now getting in close enough where it's exerting an influence on Dorian, which is right here. So that's that secondary shortwave we talked about yesterday. That is energizing Dorian as it lifts up to the north into this powerful developing post-tropical or extratropical cyclone. And also, you'll notice it doesn't go quite far enough south in geography, and we're looking at the mid-levels here, but all the dry air that is down in through the eastern part of the United States that's coming in on the backside of all of this. The water vapor loops are very useful because you sometimes it's a little hard to see. Sometimes it's obvious on the standard visible satellites, but sometimes it can be a little bit hard to see. But if you pull up the water vapor imagery, oftentimes you see the much better defined short waves that are in play here. And from Nova Scotia, it looks like it'll be a straight line path on up into the western shores of Newfoundland as we head through Saturday night and move into Sunday morning. I thought I had the Hurricane Center's forecast up here. I did. Okay, so let's go back to that map. I just want to go over a couple of things. And we do have Gabrielle, by the way. Not that it's forgotten, but it's way out in the Atlantic, and it gets better organized. It gets disorganized. It got downgraded to a remnant low yesterday. 6 hours later, the Hurricane Center had it back up as a tropical storm. Talking about it becoming a hurricane on Monday this morning. Now it's back to being disorganized again. And it's in the Atlantic in the middle of nowhere, and it's not bothering anybody. So we're not going to pay too much attention to it. Okay, so there it is on the maps. You see the hurricane warnings up covering much of Nova Scotia except the northwest coast. And then we have hurricane warnings for the west coast, the southwest corner of Newfoundland, and then extending northward from there along the west coast of Newfoundland with tropical storm warnings on either side. And you can see the track from the Hurricane Center taking it pretty much northeast and then turning it a little more east-northeast. The black-filled circle is still being considered a tropical system when it moves over Nova Scotia, and then it's considered by the Hurricane Center by Sunday morning at 8 a.m. where it has it positioned, suggesting that this at this point would be post-tropical or extratropical, or no longer a warm core cyclone, but a powerful cold core cyclone, just behaving the way these systems do, like you see them in the wintertime. So here's the current radar, and the back edge. Unfortunately, I can't see further north and east of there, but the back edge with rain going on still in Maine and some heavy rains in down east Maine. The southern part of the system, the rain is pulling out of Cape Cod now, so the center of it is to the east-northeast of the Cape and moving northeastward. So we'll move to the GFS, and let's take a look at, we're going to have a little bit of the new one. I don't think we're going to see too much change, but we'll take a look at the new GFS and see, at least through 54 hours, we can see what happens here. And we'll roll it back to the beginning. And I think it'll be better if I use the radar rather than use the rainfall. But here is the forecast rainfall. Anything starting with the, you get outside of the blue and you go to the whitish areas, you're talking about 40 to 45 millimeters or more of rain. And then you start to get into darker purples. You're talking about up to 70, 80, or even a little splash of 150 millimeters of rain that the GFS is forecasting in that little red patch in western Nova Scotia. The surface on the model, running it back, here it is for 2 o'clock this afternoon, very close to the coast and coming inland. Not too far from Halifax, by the way, as far as the low center is concerned. And the pressure being shown by the model is at a 951. And this is for this evening, 8 p.m. Heavy rains into New Brunswick. So again, the heaviest rains on the northwest side, and the winds are going to be the strongest gusts are going to be to the east of the low center, where you're going to wind up seeing some gusts because of the momentum of the movement of the storm up probably well above hurricane force. I wouldn't be surprised. And you'll also have some gusty winds on the northwest side, but they will be, I think, the east of the center. And the winds will be strong rather far out east of the center as well. They're not going to be concentrated near the center. And then by Sunday morning, 2 a.m., the low is moving northeastward and getting close to the western shores of Newfoundland. The rain is mostly done in Nova Scotia. And then you can see it here, a 955 low moving northeastward toward Labrador. The hurricane warnings, it makes sense to keep them confined to the western and southwest shores of Newfoundland and not really extend them very far to the east. A little bit of snow showing up there on the model tomorrow afternoon in parts of Labrador. I'm not sure what the elevation is in those areas, but I would imagine in some of the elevated areas you probably see some accumulation, and then out it goes northeastward and goodbye. And you can also see, by the way, on the lower right at Monday afternoon, that is Gabrielle. The model strengthening it at least to a strong tropical storm, if not a hurricane, but passing well to the east and southeast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland at that particular point. Now, I'm going to go back. I want to look at the tropics. We do have that system that is coming off the African coast, and the GFS does recognize this. You see that 10, 12, 10, 11 low as it moves it westward. There's also another low that is coming off for Tuesday of next week, so there'll be another wave behind it. I'm not 100% confident in the models doing a good job handling these things in their development and strengthening phases. I think that what's happened is, unless someone tells me otherwise, I'm thinking that when they did these recent upgrades, they've reduced the model's abilities to decide to spin up these Category 5 hurricanes at will, like they used to do. And they seem to be maybe having a little bit more trouble developing these systems as they move along. Certainly was the case with Dorian. Now, just a quick look at the upper air in the tropical Atlantic does show a somewhat favorable environment. There seems to be a narrow area of light winds aloft. When we look at this, I'm taking a look now. This will be Tuesday night, early Wednesday morning. There's sort of this narrow zone in here where there's not a whole lot of wind shear. You've got strong upper air winds to the north of that, so basically north of 20 degrees north. It doesn't look overly favorable. You also have some strong winds across the Gulf of Mexico and Florida out from the Bahamas to Bermuda. So it doesn't look like much could come out of that. A little bit of an area here that looks like might be a bit more conducive to tropical cyclone development. But other than that, the areas of development are going to be limited, but they seem to be where we're getting these tropical waves that are coming off the Cabo Verde Islands. And here's where last night's model actually did try to develop some kind of a low and heading it west, northwest, and northwest. But it takes forever here. I mean, this is really just sort of slow moving. It pops up in the short range, and it takes the better part of a week and a half to 2 weeks to cross the entire Atlantic Ocean. And who knows where it's going to be at that particular point. But I think the takeaway is that obviously we are far from done when it comes to the hurricane season. I think we're going to stay pretty active. We're going to have these bursts of activity going into the month of October, kind of playing out the way the calendar says it should play out. And in the meantime, as far as our weather is concerned in the east and in the mid-Atlantic states, it looks pretty good for the most part through Sunday. You can see there's a little bit of rain there developing in a little bit of shower activity developing in the Carolinas tomorrow evening. It's not really very much, but for the most part, it's dry, decent, quiet weather. The next frontal boundary is probably going to approach Wednesday night into Thursday morning. It's pretty weak here. You really don't see much with it. But right in here, we have a bit of a cold front that's moving on through. And the air behind it is not really all that cool. In fact, it seems like the front stalls out and then backs up as a warm front eventually. And then we have another cold front approaching for next weekend. And again, the air behind it not especially cool, really. We may have to wait down the road for some cooler air to start coming into the mix out of Canada. The upper air jet stream is still pretty much the same thing. I would say the only difference in the next week to 10 days is that we've been seeing the northern part of the jet flexing back and forth. So that's not news. The ridge in the east pops up every once in a while, doesn't last too long. And here's an instance this week where it pops up, kind of gets flattened, tries to pop up again. And this time around, maybe going into this coming weekend and early next week, it has a bit more staying power. So we may have to wait for a few days. We may have several days of ridge in the east and the Canadian jet out of the picture for a while until eventually it does try to drop back in as we head toward the point in September where autumn arrives. So it's pretty much the same. I would continue to look for the idea of troughs dropping into the eastern part of the United States, where the model may or may not be having a good handle at the moment on the timing and the strength. That we've known over the last couple of weeks, the models have been, as much as they've at times been overdoing uh, the um, uh, troughs that are coming into the eastern part of the United States. They've also been underdoing the northwest flow, and that is, I think that's something we should look for. That as we get closer to some of these, we're going 7, 8, 9 days out, that you might wind up with deeper short waves in the flow, bringing down shots of cooler air. Just want to take another look at some of these observations as they do update sometimes. There's still a Bacarro Point, as we said, it's 58 gusting to 72 miles per hour. The buoy at 42 and a half and 64 is southeast at 51 gusting to 65. Halifax at the airport at Halifax is 24 gusting to 45. On the coast at, I don't know, this is a WeatherNet observation post. I'm not sure, where it is or if it's sheltered. It seems like it might be a bit sheltered. It's 11 gusting to 26. Bevan Island is 47 gusting to 56 miles an hour. And Yarmouth right now, going into noontime, is 35 gusting to 52. I got a whole bunch. Why does it do that to me? I have all these points on there, then it puts them up and it takes them away. Let's see if I can bring them back. Come on. Nope. This tool from the Weather Service, I really like it, except it does have these funny quirks where it seems to know when I need it the most. And that's when it doesn't behave itself. Oh well. So I think that pretty well sums it up what's happening this morning. Those of you watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, it's almost 12 noon. Of course, weather conditions will continue to deteriorate um, as we go through the day. And then Nova Scotia gets better tonight. Newfoundland sees its weather conditions deteriorate overnight into Sunday. And then we can finally say goodbye to Dorian as it heads into the Atlantic graveyard. Alex Adam, do you think there is a high probability of a hurricane developing in the mid-Atlantic in the next few days? I think so, high chance, but more delay to the end of next week and into the weekend. I'd be curious, Alex, as to why you might think that. I did notice on the overnight GFS run that there was some kind of low that it was taking into the southeast coast of the United States. I didn't get to look at the European to see if it did the same thing. So I'm going to just look at this off camera and check out what it has. But I'm just kind of curious. I mean, other than seeing that on the GFS, I don't know where you would get the idea that there's some kind of hurricane going into the mid-Atlantic states. I see the European does have a weak low at the end of next week, going through the going through the Florida Straits and winding up in the northeast Gulf of Mexico. But I mean, I don't really see anything. I don't really see anything else So I'm not 100% sure what you are looking at. Wonder if Dorian approaches Scandinavia at this point, John Sachs. There's some kind of low that you might be able to follow across as a non-tropical cyclone. It wouldn't be the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last to see storms going all the way across. So, Ria, what time is Dorian meant to make landfall near Halifax? On the advisory, I believe, what did it say? 210 miles from Nova Scotia. So let me just get the actual position here. So it was 215 and moving at 30 miles an hour. So let's divide by, so landfall should be in about 5 to 6 hours. I'm going to assume that maybe it'll accelerate a bit more. So sometime say around 4or 5 o'clock with the center of the storm moving overhead. But of course the conditions are deteriorating, have deteriorated already. So you're effectively experiencing the storm right now with the worst, with the worst of it for the next 5 to 6 hours as the low center approaches and moves on through. The disturbance in the eastern part of the Atlantic, 60% chance, right? They've been kind of hovering in that 60%, 70% chance of developing. Here is, I'll go look at the the Atlantic satellite. I'm going to bring it up here. I'll pull it up on the screen in just a second. And here we go. You actually can see a little bit of turning here. I'll put it back up on the screen here. So you can take a look. It's in the far lower right. There, the tropical wave. There is a low there. The clouds are rotating in a counterclockwise fashion. You also can see to the to the northwest of that is Tropical Storm Gabrielle, and moving northwestward. Looks like some shear is going on. That the cloud tops are actually seem to be getting blown northeast to southwest, if my eye is not deceiving me. But that's, again, look, you see where it is from the standpoint of its position in the Atlantic, and it's no threat to anybody. The wave still, though, if you look back at the wave, it's not really all that well organized. It's very broad, and there's not a whole lot of convection around what I would say is a circulation center. You can also see another wave coming off the African coast, and that's the system that I think that the models have right behind the lead one. And they seem to keep identities with both these systems through the week and through into next weekend. So we'll be watching stuff. There'll be stuff out there, but there's nothing that threatens anytime soon. At least from what I'm seeing, and it's not like we're seeing a frontal boundary off the East Coast with a lot of heavy weather going on off the Carolinas and Georgia down to the Florida coastline. It's pretty quiet up and down, and that next frontal boundary is going to really just be on the weak side and not do very much of anything. Shelly Man Studios, I don't know that I would call it. It's going to get warm for a few days with that ridge building in the east. Whether it winds up being, a quote unquote heat wave, you got to remember that 90 degrees, getting to 90-degree highs in my neck of the woods now as we go through this part of September. It's a kind of a hard thing to do. You have to have a setup like you would have in a setup that would take temperatures up to close to 100 in July and August. You'd have to have that kind of setup to have temperatures taken up to near the 90-degree mark this time of year. It's a tough thing to accomplish. The sun angle, the lengthening nighttime hours in particular, because we're almost there where we're going to have 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime as the days keep getting shorter and shorter. We'll have our nice stretches of cool weather ahead. Bad hair decade. So which one is that? The 70s, 80s, or 90s? That's a great ID to use there. Is Dorian headed right for Oak Island? That could dampen treasure hunting. I don't know where Oak Island is. Hold on. Oak Island, Nova Scotia. Just going to pull it up on a map so I can see it relative to the mainland. Is this inland? Oak Island, Apple Island, Sam's Island, Shore Courier, Martin's Point. Oh, I see where it is. Okay, hang on. I'm just having a tough time with my map yet. Yes, you will have impact there. I mean, obviously you're going to have impact there. The center of the storm is going to come fairly close to you. So You're going to the weather that most of Nova Scotia is going to be experiencing is actually going to have a certain degree of uniformity to it because of the fact that you're seeing this transition over into a post-tropical cyclone. So there's not going to be a whole lot of difference. It may be just as bad uh, uh, 50 miles east of you as it is 50 miles to the southeast of you and south of you. And it's just that you're getting this um, transition to an extratropical cyclone, spreads the winds out over a larger area, brings down the maximum value of those winds. Robert Brown, Dorian caused a lot of upwelling along the East Coast. How long does it take water temperatures to recover? Depending on the wind direction, these actually may recover quickly because you're going into a high, moving to the north with an onshore flow setting up with an east wind. So that is actually going to bring the Gulf Stream waters that are offshore and pushing some of that warm water westward. So you could see those water temperatures recovering within a week, or maybe even slightly less. With that again, that flow that tends to be more onshore. The winds when they're south, anywhere from east the southeast and south this time of year bring back the warmer waters. It's when the winds go around to west and northwest and it gets pretty windy and you get, the upwelling. And of course, with the hurricane going by inside of 250 miles of your shoreline and just ripping it up all day long yesterday and all day long today, it's probably dropped the water temperatures, I bet you, by a good 10 degrees in some places into the mid 60s, maybe even into the low 60s. But they may come back by the end of next week. I bet you they'll be pretty close to where they were before all of this has started. All right, folks, it's coming up on 12:05 p.m. Eastern time. So thanks to those of you who took time out today to watch in the middle of a nice day of weather here in my neck of the woods. And for those of you watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, thanks for joining in. I hope I was able to give you some weather information that you'll find useful. And of course, follow the advice of your local officials when it comes to dealing with tropical storms and hurricanes. Don't do it yourself by looking at the maps. Don't do it off of my information, but make sure you get it from the official sources in Canada. They know your weather and your area far, and you know it far better than I do. I seem to get a sense from the Canadian and members of our audience that particularly those of you who are coastal residents have are very weather savvy, are quite weather savvy. So that's a good thing to be. You know when to react, when not to react, and when to not overreact, and that is a useful tool to have handy anytime you're dealing with storms of magnitude. Okay, that's not to say, Jersey Jeff, you can look at the model runs. That's fine, but just you have to just be careful what your interpretation of them is as you gain experience looking at them from day to day. They're not always what they seem to be. As I think if you're watching long enough and you see some of the things that we've been dealing with over the last few months, it starts out maybe looking like one thing and then it winds up being something else over time. All right, so we'll leave it there. Thanks again. I think tomorrow I'm going to take a breather since it's been nothing but Dorian for about 10 days, and I need a rest. So have a great rest of your afternoon, and we'll have a weather in 5 tomorrow morning, and I'll post it to YouTube, but probably won't do a regular live stream, and then we'll be back on Monday at roughly 7 o'clock Eastern time right here on my YouTube channel. So if you're here for the first time, hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 10,000 and I'm up to almost 8,600. So one step closer. And that's it. Have a great day. See you guys on Monday.